There's a podcast on the faithful side called Let's Get Real. Yeah,
that should have been your show, Bill.
Yeah,
Why
it should have been
your show.
It should have been. You could have been pointing like that. You could have been doing that whole thing. Let's Get Real with Stephen Jones, right? And after President Nelson had passed away, but before we knew that President Oaks was not going to announce any temples, this podcast aired with this gentleman here, who is the former executive director of Temple Department, Elder Larry Y. Wilson, right? And Generally Unquotable came across this, and this is, she's so awesome. If you guys haven't subscribed to her, please do. But I wanted just to go through, I'm not going to play it. I'm just going to go through a few statements that he made that kind of, I don't know, show you how the sausage is made in temple building. And he seems really excited about sharing it. And the host seems really excited. But when I listened to it, I was like, I wonder what faithful members would think about this. So he says, these are his words this is from the transcript of the video. He says, Elder Quentin Cook was the executive director of the council that oversees temples and family history, and he created a temple planning committee. Okay, well, that's interesting. A temple planning committee exists, right? And the church hadn't had that before. Before, they had an informal process for determining where they'd build the temples. And at this time, President Monson, so this is prior to 2018, he hadn't announced any new temples for a few years because he'd been very, very ill, right? So no temples. And before that, just kind of, I think we'll announce one here or there. Now they're going to get organized. Now they have a committee, right? The committee developed a plan, presented it to President Monson. It was accepted. It was a 15-year plan. And President Monson said, sure, we'll build about 4 to 5 temples a year. That was the pace that he was comfortable with. And so based on that plan, he started to announce some new temples in about 2014, kind of started up again. So Temple Department, they create the plan. They give it to the prophet. He says, that sounds good. 4 or 5 temples a year. We're going to do this. Okay. Sounds good, right? Then what happened? President Monson passes away, and we have President Nelson. You would think if temple building was, God telling everybody where to build, it would be consistent, right? From prophet to prophet. They're simply listening to what God's saying. But you're going to see that's not the case here. So the temple chairman person here says, President Nelson became the prophet, and we thought we better present this 15-year plan to him, so he's in the know about temples, and they're very proud of it, he says. And they were so excited that the first presidency and the Quorum of the 12 had received it very well, right, prior to Nelson. So President Nelson becomes the prophet January of 2018, and the temple committee presents the plan to him within the first 30 days. They explain the computerized tool that they have developed to be able to come up with this 15-year plan, right? Who knew? There's some kind of temple algorithm. How interesting. The variables that we'd incorporated into it in terms of membership of the church, tithing, faithfulness, growth of the church, distance to a temple, cost to get to a temple, and various other variables. So that's why I picked this old-timey computer room, because I just picture him putting all that data in, right? Yeah. So
those are all good things to consider when building a new temple. That makes sense.
They do. But, that's not how we're told it happens. We're told that God simply tells the prophet where it goes, right? We don't know anything about this kind of stuff. So they're explaining all this to President Nelson. He's taking it all in. We make the presentation and we show him, here's the priorities that we've come up with. And these are the variables that we've described. And so he says, probably about 60 new temples, right?
In 15
he has
years.
A list of 60 new temples. Yeah. That is going to probably, see all through the rest of President Nelson's reign, right?
And then some.
No. He listens to the whole thing. He's just trying to understand what's there, how we got there. And after we finish the presentation, so he doesn't really say anything that signals where he's headed until we're done. I finished the presentation, 60 new temples, and he says there needs to be another 0 after the total. Another 0. 600 new temples is what President Nelson wants this committee to prepare for. So they walked out of the room and they said, okay, obviously we're far off the mark that he had in mind. Back to the drawing board. We redid the plan. We expanded it substantially and we brought things forward. And he immediately began announcing larger numbers of temples than he had ever done prior. So he was headed for 600.
Than anybody had done prior.
Exactly. But 600, can you imagine? Would he have started maybe sensing that he was declining, announcing 40 at a time, 50 at a time, 80 at a time? I have no idea. That just blew me away. 600 temples. And then goes on to say, so he announced 200 temples overall. And we are around 400 in terms of those that are operating or have been announced or are in construction or planning. And this is true. But of the 200 he announced, only like 28 have actually been finished. There's a lot of variables that get considered. So we put those numbers into the computer model. And once they came out, we take them into consideration other things too. So I have my little graphic here of God, which is what we were always told how a temple was arrived at on his computer, right? All the numbers, all the algorithms. So here's what I think is really interesting.
Rebecca, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, please do.
How many have actually been completed? Did you say 28?
Of the ones he has announced, 200, and 28 of his announcements have been completed. 28.
Because he was president of the church for 7 years. 7 times 4 is 28.
Yeah.
So they're still on the same track of building 4 temples a year.
Yeah, they can't get off that track. According to Laura Lee Hall, the former, head temple architect, because it's all centralized, everything has to be run through the same 15 people. There's no way they can expand and build more unless they were to have, like, say, a South American, building head that could approve everything. But the way it's centralized, they can never make more than maybe 8 to 10 is what they're saying. So yeah, it is kind of interesting. But here's, I think, one of the more interesting things as we finish up here. So he said, so we had Russia on the list, right? Russia on the list, a temple somewhere in Russia, but we didn't have a specific location and it was far down on the list. Okay, so that's interesting, right? We kind of think that before each conference, President Nelson or whoever the prophet is gets some information for a few temples, right? But it sounds like there's a list. Like, could there be a list of 600 out there? There possibly could. So in this case, he describes how President Nelson jumped the list, right? He went down on the list and said, you know what? I'm going to announce Russia, right? That's what I'm going to do because that has massive crowd appeal. And he did. But to me, that reveals that there.
Or after he announced it, the people who were in charge of implementing it moved it way down on the list because they knew they didn't have a place to put it.
Yeah, well, no, but it says right here already, it says Russia was way down on the list. So, and it says here that he forgot the number for consideration to be announced at conference, and he just said we need to add Russia. So that to me tells me that there's a huge list, and he just at his discretion goes this. So the final takeaway here, is, but now. And he's talking about what we're doing now prior to conference. It's like they're declaring if it's going to be there, then they're going to figure out the details after the fact, right? This is what we saw. Fairview, Heber, Lone Mountain. They're just going to say it's going to be built and then they'll figure it out. That's really powerful. Actually, it reminds me of First Nephi chapter 1. I don't know how we're going to get the plates, but we're just going to get them. God damn it. I added that, not him. Well, the old way was to have all the planning done. So silly. Have the site secured. Ridiculous. And we have approvals to be able to proceed to build on the site. Oh, who would do that, right? And we wouldn't announce until all those things in their place. But now there's a new way. Okay. This new way was talked about a week before conference. This is so powerful. It was electric with the revelatory feeling that a prophet recognized that we are approaching a millennial day. So here's my thought. Looks like the old way is the new way, right? Because this is exactly what they're going to do now. They're going to secure the site. They're going to have everything in place. They're going to do every single thing and then announce it so that things like Fairview, Lone Mountain, Heber, Cody, those don't happen in the public eye because the PR is so negative. So I thought that was fascinating.
Well, of course they're going to do that because this is the way a lawyer would do it.
Yes.
The heart surgeon is going to announce them out of the blue, thinking that God has revealed to him
from the heart
names and locations for temples without knowing anything else about it, except maybe where it is on the globe. And here comes Oaks as the attorney coming in. No, we're stopping this right now. This has been killing me. And we are finding out, this is at least one way that we're finding out what happens when Robert Duvall becomes the godfather, when the attorney takes over the family.
No, it makes me rethink every one of the pictures we've seen of him, or the interactions where maybe Oaks is just going, oh my gosh, you know, like, you haven't thought this through, you know, because I think Oaks kind of thinks things through. So anyway, that's all I had on that.